Rivers often hold secrets beneath their surface, concealing evidence of tragedies and crimes. In one such hidden corner of nature's depths, a horrifying truth was revealed when the waves washed ashore a young girl's faceless body. This chilling discovery shook the small, quiet town of Warra, Oklahoma, a place where life moved slowly and everyone knew each other. Warra, nestled in the southern region of the state, had a population of around 2,000 people, a close-knit community not accustomed to such shocking events. It was a town where trust and familiarity defined daily life, making the sudden and gruesome emergence of this tragedy all the more jarring. This is the story that would haunt Warra and its residents forever. Heather Rich lived with her parents, Gail and Dwayne, and her 3 brothers in Warra, Oklahoma. The Rich family was well known in the small town, where everyone was familiar with one another. Heather, the only daughter, stood out not just for her beauty, but for her bright personality. She was kind-hearted and adventurous, always eager to experience life to its fullest. At 16, she was a sophomore in high school, balancing her role as an excellent student with her position on the cheerleading team. Despite her academic achievements and popularity, Heather was in the midst of her teenage rebellion, exploring the world beyond her parents' protective gaze. Her love for fun and adventure sometimes clashed with the boundaries set by her family, leading to typical teenage disagreements. Still, she was seen by many as a spirited, vibrant young girl with a bright future ahead. In the fall of 1990s, tension simmered within the Rich family over an unexpected expense. Heather had accumulated a $300 phone bill, a significant burden amidst their financial struggles. Her father, Dwayne, an electrician, had suffered a severe injury in a transformer explosion, rendering him unable to work and in need of expensive surgeries and treatments. Gail, Heather's mother, had to take on additional work to support the family, making every dollar count. When the bill came in, Gail was frustrated by Heather's lack of financial awareness, arguing with her about her wasteful spending and excessive phone use. Although Dwayne was calmer, understanding the impulsiveness of teenage behavior, he agreed that Heather needed to be more responsible given the family's situation. The argument escalated quickly, and Heather, unwilling to back down, retreated to her room, still upset. Before going to sleep, she passed through the living room, briefly wishing her father good night, but purposely ignoring her mother, signaling that she was still hurt by the confrontation. It was a tense and silent end to the night, with the conflict left unresolved. The following morning, October 3rd, Gail went about her usual routine of waking the children for breakfast. However, Heather did not come downstairs. Initially attributing her absence to teenage resentment or simply sleeping in, Gail expected that hunger would eventually draw her daughter to the table. But as time passed and Heather remained unseen, concern grew. When Gail finally went to check her room, Heather was nowhere to be found. Panic began to set in as her parents realized that something was terribly wrong. Heather's disappearance immediately alarmed her parents. She had never run away from home before, nor had she shown signs of wanting to escape her life in Warra. Heather was a responsible student who cared about her appearance and routine. It was out of character for her to leave without any of her belongings or a change of clothes. Frantic, Gail and Dwayne started calling all of Heather's friends, hoping she might be staying with one of them. However, none of them knew where she was, heightening their concerns that something was terribly wrong. Desperate, Gail and Dwayne rushed to the sheriff's office in Warra to report Heather missing. However, the police, accustomed to dealing with teenage runaways, dismissed the case as a typical adolescent rebellion. The officers reassured Gail and Dwayne that Heather had probably run off to cool down after their argument and would return soon, as most teenagers do. They explained that since 24 hours had not yet passed, they could not officially consider her a missing person. Dissatisfied with the lack of urgency from the police, Heather's parents took matters into their own hands. They decided to search the town themselves, speaking directly with Heather's friends and acquaintances. They retraced Heather's steps and tried to find any clue about where she might have gone. Despite their efforts and the growing sense of dread, they found no sign of their daughter, leaving them even more distressed and fearing the worst. As Gail and Dwayne continued their desperate search for Heather, they turned their attention to the people closest to her, particularly her friends and romantic interests. One of the first people they contacted was Randy Wood, Heather's ex-boyfriend and captain of the school football team. Randy and Heather had remained friends after their brief relationship ended, and he was one of the last people to have significant contact with her. When Gail spoke with Randy, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. His responses felt rehearsed, almost robotic, as if he were repeating a pre-planned story. Moreover, Randy didn't seem genuinely concerned about Heather's disappearance, which only made Gail more suspicious. The next person they contacted was Heather's current boyfriend, Josh Bagwell. When Gail called his house, it was Josh's grandmother who picked up the phone. She insisted that Josh was asleep after attending a party the previous night and refused to wake him. Despite Gail's pressing questions, the grandmother claimed she hadn't seen Heather and provided no useful information. The defensive tone and reluctance to let Gail speak to Josh raised red flags, leaving the Rich family feeling increasingly unsettled. Despite their mounting suspicions, neither Randy nor Josh admitted to knowing anything about Heather's whereabouts. With no other leads, Gail and Dwayne drove all over the county, searching for any clues to explain their daughter's mysterious disappearance. Their efforts, however, proved fruitless, deepening the sense of hopelessness as precious time continued to slip away. After a week of relentless searching by Heather's parents, law enforcement finally joined the search, treating her disappearance more seriously. However, hope for a safe return was shattered when, during a patrol near the Texas border, police discovered a body floating face down in the river. The body, partially submerged in muddy water, was covered in thick layers of dirt, as if someone had attempted to conceal it from sight. Upon pulling the body ashore, officers were met with a gruesome scene. The victim's face was brutally disfigured, and the body was riddled with numerous buckshot wounds, suggesting a close-range shotgun blast. The injuries were so severe that initial identification was impossible by visual means alone. The victim's face had been so mutilated that no features were distinguishable. It was clear that whoever had done this had intended to prevent identification and obscure the crime. Gail and Dwayne were called to assist in the heartbreaking task of identifying the body. Amid their grief, they recognized their daughter not by her face but by a ring she always wore, one that was engraved with her name. Forensic experts later confirmed the body was Heather's through dental records, finding non-removable braces that matched those she wore. The confirmation of Heather's identity devastated the town of Wara and set in motion a deeper investigation into the tragic death of a young girl whose life was cut far too short. The tragic news of Heather's death spread rapidly through Wara, leaving the small community stunned and in disbelief. It was not just the loss of a promising young girl that hit so hard. It was the violent, brutal nature of the crime that left the town reeling. Heather had been a bright, well-known student, and her senseless murder cast a dark shadow over the entire community. Conversations in the town revolved around little else as everyone tried to come to terms with the horror of what had happened to one of their own. With the investigation fully underway, the police turned their focus to those closest to Heather, beginning with her friends and especially her former and current boyfriends. Randy Wood, Heather's ex-boyfriend and the captain of the high school football team, became an immediate person of interest. Despite his calm demeanor and repeated insistence that he knew nothing about Heather's disappearance or death, the investigators sensed that something was off. Josh Bagwell, Heather's current boyfriend, also came under scrutiny, and his suspicious behavior only heightened concerns. His reluctance to speak directly with Heather's parents and evasive answers raised red flags for both the police and Gail. Throughout the investigation, Gail's intuition remained sharp. She had an overwhelming feeling that Randy and Josh knew more than they were letting on. Both boys seemed oddly emotionless and rehearsed in their recounting of the events surrounding Heather's disappearance. Gail noted that when she spoke to Randy, his responses seemed robotic, as if he had practiced them, while Josh's refusal to wake up and talk directly with her immediately felt like a cover-up. Their dismissive attitude, lack of worry for Heather, and insistence on a single version of events all suggested to Gail that they were hiding something critical. This motherly intuition proved to be vital as it pushed investigators to dig deeper into the lives of both boys, suspecting that they held key information about the night Heather went missing. As the investigation progressed, the events of the night Heather went missing began to come to light. Despite the argument with her mother and her parents' strict ban on leaving the house, Heather had secretly made plans to meet up with her boyfriend, Josh Bagwell. In a rebellious act typical of her adventurous nature, Heather waited until her parents were asleep, then climbed out of her bedroom window and snuck out into the night. Heather was drawn to the carefree and wild lifestyle of Josh and his friend Randy Wood, who were known to party often and live on the edge. Unlike Heather, who was a diligent student and cheerleader, Randy and Josh were less concerned with school and more interested in having a good time. Randy, the football team captain, and Josh, known for his flashy lifestyle and wealthy family, were popular among the local youth. They often organized late-night hangouts involving alcohol, drugs, and reckless behavior, which Heather occasionally participated in, testing the boundaries her parents set for her. On the night of October 2nd, the trio met up to party, unaware of the tragedy that would unfold. They gathered at a trailer near Josh's house, where they drank and partied, along with a few other friends. This kind of night had become somewhat routine for Heather since she began spending more time with Josh. However, the carefree fun took a dangerous turn as the night went on, and the situation quickly spiraled out of control. As investigators pieced together the timeline, it became clear that Heather's disappearance was connected to this party. The details of what happened after Heather met with Josh and Randy remained hazy, with conflicting stories and evasive statements from those involved. But one thing was certain: this night of teenage rebellion, intended to be just another fun evening, would tragically end with Heather's death. During the investigation, police conducted thorough interviews with Randy and Josh, who both provided eerily similar accounts of the night Heather disappeared. Their stories were so well aligned and rehearsed that it immediately raised suspicions. Each detail matched perfectly, right down to the wording, as if they were reading from a script. Both teenagers insisted they knew nothing of Heather's whereabouts after the party and denied any involvement in her disappearance. However, their calm demeanor and lack of genuine concern for Heather seemed to hide a much darker truth. As the forensic team examined Heather's body, more shocking details came to light. The autopsy revealed that Heather had been shot 9 times at close range with a shotgun. The brutality of the crime was apparent. 8 of the shots had struck her back, and 1 was fired into the back of her head. The sheer number of wounds indicated a rage-fueled, calculated act. Such an excessive number of shots seemed to point to an attempt to ensure she was dead and to make identification difficult. The autopsy findings painted a clear picture of a horrific crime, heightening the urgency to find those responsible. In addition to the autopsy results, police began to piece together clues about the weapon and ammunition used in the murder. They focused on the type of buckshot found in Heather's body and started tracking down who in the local area owned a shotgun capable of firing those rounds. Given the unusual number of shots fired, detectives theorized that either someone had intentionally reloaded to fire an extra round or a weapon with a large capacity had been used. These details about the type of firearm and ammunition became crucial leads, suggesting the involvement of more than one person in Heather's death and complicating the timeline of events further. As police continued to investigate, a new name emerged. Curtis Gamble, a 19-year-old with a known criminal background and connections to both Randy and Josh. Unlike the other 2 boys, Curtis was not a well-liked student or star athlete. He had a troubled past that included arrests and time spent in juvenile detention centers. Despite his young age, Curtis was already seen as a local troublemaker and was known to associate with some of the rougher elements of the town's youth. His ties to Randy and Josh placed him in their circle, and soon police started looking at him as a potential suspect. Curtis had a direct connection to a critical aspect of the case: the location where Heather's body was discovered. He was familiar with the bridge on the Texas border, where her body was found submerged in the river. Curtis's grandmother revealed that he often visited the area to fish and knew it well. The proximity of Curtis's home to the bridge further raised police suspicions about his involvement. It seemed unlikely that someone unfamiliar with the area would know to dispose of a body in such a remote location. The most damning evidence, however, came when detectives discovered that Curtis owned a Mossberg shotgun, a firearm that matched the buckshot wounds found on Heather's body. A ballistics examination confirmed that the bullets extracted from Heather's body were fired from Curtis's shotgun. This crucial piece of evidence tied him directly to the murder, revealing that Curtis's weapon was the one used to brutally kill Heather. With this information in hand, the police now had a much clearer picture of the crime and could begin to unravel how Curtis, Randy, and Josh were all involved in Heather's tragic death. As the investigation intensified, police confronted the three suspects with the mounting evidence. Randy Wood, under pressure from law enforcement, finally broke his silence and confessed, but his version of events only added more complexity to the case. Randy claimed that Curtis Gamble was the one who shot Heather, describing Curtis as the initiator of the violence. According to Randy, Curtis had taken the Mossberg shotgun, forced Heather to the bridge, and brutally shot her 9 times while Randy and Josh stood by helpless. Randy insisted that he was coerced into participating and that he had only assisted under fear for his own life. He described Curtis as volatile and dangerous, framing him as the mastermind behind the crime who had forced both Randy and Josh into complicity. Despite Randy's testimony, police were skeptical. Randy's reputation as a clean-cut student, successful athlete, and someone who had never previously had any trouble with the law didn't align with his involvement in such a violent crime. However, the confession was also an attempt to distance himself from the murder, pinning the entire act on Curtis while downplaying his own role. Investigators found it difficult to reconcile the Randy they knew, a star football player, well-liked, and with a seemingly bright future, with someone capable of being part of such a gruesome murder. The police suspected that Randy might be trying to shift the blame away from himself and onto the more easily vilified Curtis. Meanwhile, Josh Bagwell's behavior during the investigation remained suspicious. Unlike Randy, who eventually confessed, albeit in a limited way, Josh refused to speak openly with the police. He declined to cooperate in any meaningful way, opting to stay silent rather than give his own account of what had happened the night Heather died. His refusal to talk left crucial questions unanswered and further fueled suspicions about his role in the crime. Despite his silence, Josh's presence at the scene of the murder and his connection to both Randy and Curtis suggested he was deeply involved, if not equally complicit. The conflicting confessions and testimonies created a tangled web for investigators to unravel. Randy's claim that Curtis was solely responsible contradicted the evidence suggesting all three were involved in the events leading to Heather's death. Randy painted a picture of a chaotic night driven by Curtis's impulsive and violent actions, but the lack of clear statements from Josh only complicated the case further. Each of the boys seemed to be shielding themselves while implicating the others, making it difficult to discern who played which roles in the murder. Ultimately, police had to sift through these conflicting accounts, forensic evidence, and behavioral cues to uncover the truth. It became clear that all three teenagers were present during Heather's final moments, but the exact details of what happened that night, the sequence of events, motivations, and who pulled the trigger remained shrouded in lies, fear, and silence. Nonetheless, the evidence pointed to a terrifying conclusion. Heather's death was the result of a horrifying and deliberate act shared among those she trusted most. The events of Heather Rich's murder night were harrowing and tragic, unfolding like a horror story in a small Oklahoma town. As the investigation revealed more details, it became clear that Curtis Gamble was the primary instigator of the violence that led to Heather's death. On the night of October 2nd, Heather, Randy, and Josh had gone out to party together, drinking heavily and indulging in typical teenage rebellion. But what started as a night of youthful fun quickly took a dark turn. Curtis, older and with a more menacing presence, joined them, and his actions soon spiraled out of control. When Heather became intoxicated and was in a helpless state, Curtis saw an opportunity to abuse her. According to later confessions, Curtis attempted to take advantage of Heather, and when she resisted and began to regain consciousness, he decided she was a liability. Fearing that Heather might report the incident or try to escape, Curtis made a chilling demand. She had to be killed. This sudden escalation in violence shocked Randy and Josh, but they were too fearful of Curtis to resist his orders. Curtis, who had a history of unpredictable and violent behavior, made it clear that he would not hesitate to harm anyone who defied him. Randy, under pressure and likely in fear for his own life, became complicit in the crime. Along with Curtis, he helped move Heather's unconscious body to Josh's car, concealing her in the trunk. The group then drove towards Curtis's house, but before they reached their destination, Curtis made another chilling decision. to dispose of Heather permanently. He directed the group to the bridge where her body would later be found. When they reached the bridge, the group stopped in the middle, and Curtis forced Heather out of the trunk. Holding the Mossberg shotgun, Curtis brutally shot Heather 9 times at close range, once in the back of her head and 8 times in her back. The brutality of the act was intended not only to kill her, but to disfigure her and prevent identification. As the shots rang out, Randy and Josh stood by, too terrified to intervene. With Heather lifeless and her body torn apart by the gunfire, Curtis and Josh then threw her body off the bridge into the river below. With the horrific act complete, the boys fled the scene. Randy and Josh, driven by fear of Curtis and guilt over their involvement, remained silent about the murder. They aided in covering up the crime, discarding evidence and sticking to their rehearsed stories to avoid detection. Curtis's cold-blooded actions in the trio's cover-up left the community in shock as the truth behind Heather Rich's tragic death began to unfold. The revelations surrounding Heather Rich's tragic murder shocked the town of Wara and set the stage for a dramatic and emotionally charged trial. With confessions, conflicting testimonies, and compelling forensic evidence, law enforcement brought formal charges against Curtis Gamble, Randy Wood, and Josh Bagwell. Each of the teenagers faced severe accusations, including the abduction and brutal murder of 16-year-old Heather, in addition to various charges related to the disposal of her body and attempts to cover up the crime. Curtis Gamble, as the main instigator of the murder, faced the most serious accusations. Given his violent history, his role in initiating the events leading to Heather's death, and his use of the Mossberg shotgun to commit the murder, prosecutors sought the maximum penalty. During the trial, Curtis ultimately agreed to a plea deal that spared him the death penalty, but resulted in life imprisonment. The terms of his sentencing included the possibility of parole after 30 years. Despite the severity of the punishment, Curtis's plea allowed him to avoid a potentially worse fate while still facing the consequences of his horrifying actions. Randy Wood's case unfolded differently. Initially, prosecutors offered Randy a plea deal that would have resulted in a more lenient sentence in exchange for his full cooperation and testimony against Curtis and Josh. However, Randy made a surprising decision. Rejecting the plea deal, he insisted on revealing the complete truth of what happened that fateful night. He took the stand to recount the events leading to Heather's death, providing a detailed and emotional testimony of Curtis's dominant role in the murder and his own coerced participation. Randy's decision to tell the truth, despite the risk of a harsher sentence, indicated his desire to achieve justice for Heather and ensure the real story was heard by the court. He wanted to show that while he had been involved, Curtis had been the primary instigator, and Randy's actions were out of fear rather than intent. Josh Bagwell, on the other hand, maintained his silence throughout much of the trial. He refused to speak openly about the events of the murder night or acknowledge any culpability. The prosecution highlighted his role in aiding the crime and concealing Heather's body, and despite his silence, Josh's connection to the murder was evident through the evidence presented. In the end, all 3 teenagers were found guilty of their respective charges, with the harshest sentences reserved for those who had played the most active roles in Heather's abduction and murder. Throughout the trial, Heather's parents, Gail and Dwayne Rich, attended every session, facing the grim details of their daughter's last moments. For them, the focus was on understanding the truth behind Heather's death. Despite the pain and grief, they wanted to make sure that the complete story was revealed and that justice was served for their daughter. Gail and Dwayne found solace in knowing that the truth was no longer hidden behind lies and that those responsible would be held accountable. Their aim was not revenge, but closure, a desire to comprehend why their daughter's life had been taken so brutally and to find some semblance of peace in knowing that her killers would face justice. The sentencing brought a sense of finality to the case. Curtis, the primary murderer, was condemned to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole, a decision that, while offering some hope for eventual release, still ensured he faced the consequences of his horrific actions. Randy, despite rejecting a plea deal, received a significant sentence, but was seen by many as someone who had tried to make amends by revealing the full truth. Josh, whose silence spoke volumes about his role in the crime, was also sentenced to life imprisonment, marking the end of the legal proceedings. The trial became a pivotal moment for the Wara community, a reminder of the fragility of life and the unpredictable horrors that can emerge even in the quietest of towns. For the Rich family, though their grief would never fully fade, the trial's outcome offered some measure of resolution. They knew that the men who had taken their daughter's life would be behind bars, unable to harm anyone else, and that Heather's story, though tragic, had been told in full. The conclusion of the trial left an indelible mark on the town of Wara and stirred strong reactions from the broader public. The harsh sentences handed down to Curtis Gamble, Randy Wood, and Josh Bagwell, combined with the sensational details of the case, caused a significant outcry. Community members were torn between feelings of relief that justice was served and shock at the gruesome nature of Heather's murder. Discussions in the town were dominated by mixed emotions: anger at the brutality of the crime, sympathy for the Rich family, and debates over whether the sentences given to the three young men were appropriate. Randy Wood's role, in particular, became a focal point of public discussion. Although he had been part of the crime, many viewed his decision to reject the plea deal and come forward with the truth as a brave act seeking justice for Heather. The fact that he chose to fully disclose his involvement, despite the consequences, painted Randy as someone who was trying to atone for his actions, redeeming himself in the eyes of some community members. However, others argued that his participation in the cover-up and his failure to prevent the murder still made him culpable. Regardless of perspective, Randy's story stood out as a complex tale of regret, fear, and ultimately a desire to right a wrong. Josh Bagwell, who remained largely silent throughout the trial, faced less empathy from the public. He, like Curtis, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Serving his sentence alongside Curtis, Josh's refusal to cooperate left many feeling that he had been rightfully punished as a willing accomplice to the murder and cover-up. The silence he maintained during the investigation only deepened suspicions about his role and motive, making his fate a clear-cut case of justice in the eyes of many observers. The aftermath of the trial lingered long after the sentences were handed down. In January 2002, Curtis and Josh made a daring attempt to escape from prison, taking advantage of the night to try to regain their freedom. The escape attempt, however, was quickly thwarted, and both convicts were captured and returned to prison. The incident brought renewed attention to Heather's case and served as a stark reminder of the dangerous nature of those who had been involved in her murder. Heather's tragic story remains a haunting cautionary tale for the town of Wara and beyond. It serves as a reminder of the unpredictability of teenage rebellion, the hidden dangers that can exist within a close-knit community, and the devastating impact that one night of reckless behavior can have on so many lives. The pain of Heather's death is something that will never fully heal for those who knew and loved her. But her story stands as a powerful testament to the importance of truth and justice, no matter how difficult or heartbreaking it may be. The town continues to remember Heather not just as a victim of a brutal crime, but as a young girl whose life was taken far too soon, her story forever echoing as a warning and a legacy within the community. If you found Heather Rich's story as compelling and heartbreaking as we did, make sure to hit the subscribe button and follow our channel for more true crime documentaries. We delve deep into the most gripping cases, uncovering every detail and sharing stories that need to be told. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay updated on our latest content. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to having you join our community.